Okay. Welcome everybody. I probably don't need to tell you guys this, but my name is Lisa Ridge. I'm the president of New Jersey Humanist Network, and I thank you for joining us today on this beautiful day. NJHN is a 501c3 nonprofit educational organization founded in 1994. Hey, we're going to be celebrating 30 years next year in 2024. That offers humanist community in New Jersey. We're based in Somerset County and have members and supporters all around the state and region. We host programs and events every month. We embrace reason, ethics, social justice, and philosophical naturalism. We're committed to our understanding of the universe and solving problems through compassion, common experience, and civic engagement. We encourage lifelong learning and respect for the natural world and our human diversity. So we've got this, I'm going to do this slideshow. And maybe if you need any information from it, we'll run it again at the end. This is our program today. Ron's here with us. He's going to be speaking on the nature of religious experience. All right. We're going to do a land acknowledgement. I'm just going to let you read that, but we do acknowledge that we are coming to you from the traditional home of the Lenape tribal nations. That includes New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania along the Delaware River, New York City, Long Island, and the lower Hudson Valley. You can see we have a lot of activities going on every month. I want to tell you about our scholarship winner, who we are announcing that we had our very first secular student scholarship that we sponsored this year, and our recipient is Tinashe Muzambi. And he will be at our Human Light celebration on December 17th to share his journey from Zimbabwe to Rutgers University as a graduate student in public health. So we don't have a book club. We have a book club every month on the fourth Thursday, but we don't have one this fourth Thursday for pretty obvious reasons about fourth Thursday. And so we're doing one book over 2 months. And it's Solido, a memoir by Javier Zamora. And then we'll be reading that. Our book club discussion will be on December 28th. We have an Exploring Humanism discussion that we've been doing. We're now well into exploring the 10 commitments, which have been put together by the American Humanist Association. Our next meeting, we meet on the first Sundays. It's December 3rd with ethical development. And then in January, we'll be talking about peace and social justice. We have our monthly dinner at the Omega Diner on the third Tuesday of every month. That's in North Brunswick. That's coming up this coming Tuesday. We won't be having a dinner in December because it'll be 2 days after Human Light, and we should all still be full from that. So we're doing our holiday card exchange again this year. That's proven to be kind of fun and kind of nice to go to the mailbox and find handwritten cards from our friends in New Jersey Humanist Network. This is a members only event, but all you have to do is send your name and address to our email. And on December 4th, when we get all those together, we will send that list out to everyone who's signed up. And then you can send holiday cards, and you can go to the website and find out more about this. But obviously we encourage cards that are, more season's greetings, happy holidays, winter scenes, and that kind of thing. And then we ask everybody to display your cards, take a picture for us so we can show that to everyone. We get a few more people every year. Got a lot of new members this year, so hopefully we'll get more people to participate. So I should probably do this slide first. So we have arranged our Human Light celebration. Human Light started with New Jersey Humanist Network. So this will be our 23rd celebration this year. We are again back at the Stony Brook Grill, which is in Branchburg. They have a brunch buffet. We are having live music. We will be doing the silent auction. And as I said, our scholarship recipient will be there to talk a little bit about his journey. And so we always, in conjunction with Human Light, well, actually, since COVID, we used to have a silent auction in person at the event, but we moved it to online, and that has worked really well. So we're doing the silent auction again. We are still, we're just really just starting to ask for donations. That can be new, unused, unopened items that you want to donate. It can also be handmade items, whether it's quilting, knitting, crocheting, jewelry, handmade jewelry. It could also be paintings in any, whatever, oil, water-based, those acrylic, and like homemade, handmade, I shouldn't say homemade, handmade cards or notepads, those kinds of things. And then we'll get our, the auction will start on December 10th. That's a week before Human Light. And then the auction will end during our Human Light event. And then we'll announce the winning bidders and arrange for items to be given to people. So here's we have our spread shop, which has got new merchandise just added for holidays. There's Human Light. There's, there are some new winter apparel, like they call that a beanie. I don't know. And sweatshirts and hoodies and things like that. And we have everything you see here is available in every design. So, there's lots of options there. And right now, today is the last day of a 20% off sale. So if you're interested in getting anything, there's a lot more than just what you see here. So,
Lisa?
Yes.
Not to toot her horn, but I think Gwen has a new Human Light image that she created. Correct, Gwen? I think I saw it.
I think Gwen is here. She might be on.
Yeah, I do.
So
Yeah.
So we might want to look at it.
I don't know if that's in the shop yet, but
No,
I
need to make a living as an artist, so I got to keep some stuff for myself too. But yeah.
Yes. We can probably put something together so that we can show that on Gwen's website, or yeah, we can do that. Sorry, I have my distraction at my house.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We have a built-in audience for Human Light stuff.
Right. So these are all the places where you can find us. Different, but you might find us doing absolutely nothing there, but you will find us there. And so I want to say that if you've been meaning to become a dues paying member of NJHN, now's a great time to do that, since we will have a $5 per person dues increase starting in January, which is our first increase in over 20 years. And everything we do, everything we're able to do, is only possible with our members' financial support. And then finally, we have, it's a terrible graphic, I know, but we have joined PayPal's giving fund. And so if you use PayPal, you can designate New Jersey Humanist Network, Inc. as your preferred charity and donate $1 with any PayPal purchase that includes eBay. And you can also make donations to NJHN without transaction fees through the Giving Fund. So we will have time for Q&A after the talk, where you can ask your questions directly or type them into the chat. And with that, I am going to introduce our speaker, who I am now going to spotlight. There you go. Hi, Ron.
There is a spotlight. Wow.
There is.
I want to point out, I set up for Amazon purchases that we get a kickback from that. So
Right.
all of our
Amazon's-
members do that.
If that was Amazon Smile, that program
Yeah.
has ended. That
It has.
program, yeah, they ended it earlier this year.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Good to know.
why trying to do something else.
Hmm.
So I'm going to introduce you, Ron. Ron Flannery is a retired computer scientist and futurist. During his 45 years in the computer industry, Ron worked for various companies, including the U.S. Army, Bell Laboratories, AT&T, Amdahl, and EMC. And he has held nearly every occupational title in that space. He is a board member of the Red Bank Humanists and gives frequent talks for them. His varied interests include sailing, music, instrument making, computer science, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and brain science. So please welcome Ron Flannery.
And thank you all for being here. I want to apologize in advance. I gave a talk yesterday, not this talk, a different one. And my voice gave out. So it'll probably give out today too. But if it does, bear with me. But let me bring up my presentation. Who can share? Why am I getting this? Post only. Okay.
Just hit the, instead
I
of
got
the arrow,
I
there
got
you
it.
go.
Okay, there we are. Today, what I'm going to talk about, if I can make this work, is religious experience, the nature of religious experience. This is targeted at humanists because, I'm an atheist, and I, of course, approach this from an atheist viewpoint. And my agenda is are religious experiences real? And actually, what are they? Where do they come from? And are they a good thing or a bad thing? And if they're a good thing, should we actively pursue having some kind of religious experience? So first off, are they real? Well, they seem to be as old as humanity itself. Some of the oldest books and the most revered books we have talk about religious experiences. And they're almost always explained using religion. And you know what? Is there any way I can get rid of all of these people on my screen? Let me see.
Good.
There,
So-
that'll do it.
No, good.
Right. So religious experiences are traditionally explained using religion and mysticism. And, it goes with the title. A Christian philosopher, Rudolf Otto, in 1917, called these experiences numinous and argues that they gave rise to religion in the first place. And that's probably true. A long time ago, I like to say 30,000 years ago, but this stuff goes even further back than that, I think. When people had experiences they couldn't explain, they would come up with whatever they could make up. And a lot of times, they defaulted to God or gods or something like that. The word numinous, by the way, just means exactly what it says here. It's arousing spiritual or religious emotion. So you learned a new word today. Numinous experiences often involve a sense of ecstasy, not always. This comes from some Greek words, ecstasis, meaning out of stillness or outside yourself. And this is a sensation of being removed from ordinary life. So if you can have an experience that removes you from ordinary life and you can't explain it, you can call it a religious experience. And these go way back. This is, I think, Bernini. And this is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. And you can see, if I can make, all right. There she is up close. And you can see she's experiencing something good. And I hope it's good for you as well. This has happened over and over again in religious art, and everybody seems to have the same kind of look on their face. They're all looking up, they got their mouths open, they're having an ecstatic moment. In numinous or sacred experiences, the believer comes in contact with some transcendental reality, right? You're getting outside yourself, and even if you can't explain it, it's happening. Here's Norman Habel, an Australian Old Testament scholar. He defines numinous experiences as the structured way in which a believer enters in a relationship with or gains an awareness of the sacred within the context of a particular religious tradition. And the things to highlight here is there's a structured way to do this. Okay, so he's got a recipe. You want to have a numinous experience? There's a recipe for that, but it's in the context of a religious tradition. So he's an Old Testament guy, so obviously he's going to say, well, you got to be, an Old Testament kind of person, maybe Jewish, maybe Christian, maybe a Muslim, who knows. Moore and Habel identify two classes of religious experiences, the immediate and the mediated. The immediate comes to the believer without any intervening agency or mediator. So you got to have some deity or some mystical belief, and you experience it directly. It just comes to you. There are four classical forms of immediate religious experience: the numinous, we already mentioned that, ecstasy, enthusiasm, and mystic experience. Numinous is the magnificent mystery, as it's defined in the link below. The Christian uses prayer and contemplation on the Bible to get this numinous experience and feel at awe with God, thus creating that experience. And in that context, prayer is a conversation between you and God. So you can get this numinous experience by talking to God and hopefully him talking back, right? Ecstasy is when the soul leaves the body. So if you're going to have a transcendental experience, this is kind of it. The Turkish Sufi, they have another name for themselves as well. They're also referred to as whirling dervishes out in the non-Sufi world. They get to this ecstatic state by whirling around in circles, sometimes for hours. They listen to a particular kind of religious music while they do this, and they achieve this ecstatic state. Then there's enthusiasm, and that's where you're possessed by the deity. And that's an interesting concept. And that goes back to the dualism idea, where you have a body, but you also have a mind that's separate from your body. So if some other mind can possess your body, then you can achieve this enthusiasm, as long as that other mind is the deity that's coming into possession of your body. Being a Christian, according to Peter Kreeft, is more like having your soul possessed by a spirit than having your mind clothed with new beliefs. It's like being haunted by the Holy Ghost. There's a concept for you. Now, one of the problems with this is if you can be haunted by the Holy Ghost, you can also be haunted by demons. And that goes hand in hand with a lot of Christian beliefs and other belief systems where you can actually be possessed by something evil. And I think this goes back mainly to people, and let's go back, say, 30,000 years. If somebody was schizophrenic, if somebody was paranoid, if somebody had an epileptic seizure, they would assign that to either a deity possessing the body or a demon possessing the body, depending on how the manifestation came out. And of course, people still believe this stuff today. You can still get an exorcism from the Catholic Church. The mystic experience, that's the fourth one, is becoming one with the transcendent. And this usually goes along with some kind of practice like meditation or staring at a mandala or something like that. Um, Psychologist and philosopher William James described four characteristics of mystical experience in something he wrote called The Varieties of Religious Experience. And according to him, an experience like this is transient. It comes to you and it's going to leave you, and you're going to return to normal after it's done. But while you're having the experience, you're outside your normal perception of space and time. So again, you're transcending the world. It's ineffable. You can't explain it. You can't put it into words. You tell people, wow, I had an experience. It was amazing. I wish I could tell you. And it's also noetic, which means you learn something there. And sadly, you can't explain it to anybody, right? You want them to have the experience, you want them to have the knowledge, but it's knowledge that's hidden and I can't explain it to you. And it's passive. The experience happens to the individual without conscious control. It's not like you're driving the bus. The spirit has control. So I made a little chart for you. So there's the historically ubiquitous experiences, and I listed them out for you. And most of them are explained with religion as being transient, ineffable, noetic, and passive. So where do these things come from? Well, if you're one of the Blues Brothers, you walk into a church and you're given a mission from God. I have not yet received a mission, but I'm waiting. One way to get it is through extended exercise. And you saw that with the Sufis, the whirling dervishes, often running in a large communal circle, which is used in various tribal and neo-pagan religions. You can get a religious experience. And we experience this in modern times in a non-religious sense with a runner's high. And a runner's high, recently it's been discovered that the exercise increases the levels of endocannabinoids in the bloodstream. And endocannabinoids attach to the same receptors as dopamine in your brain. And that's the same receptor that THC attaches to as well. Endocannabinoids move easily through the cellular barrier, the blood-brain barrier that separates your blood from your brain. And that's why it's able to hit you at the brain level. And when that happens, you get this mood improving neuromodulators that promote short-term psychoactive effects, such as reduced anxiety and feelings of calm. Yeah, it used to be thought that it was endorphins that cause the runner's high, but now we know that's not the case. So extended exercise, increased extended exercise can increase endocannabinoids in your brain, lowers anxiety, and produces feelings of calm. Other religious practices that work are praying, music, and dance. Now, I was raised for way too long as a Catholic. And one of the things I was encouraged to do as a child was to pray the rosary. And the rosary actually works because it's enforced very powerful meditative technique. Because as you go through the rosary, you know, there's a prayer you say when you're holding the cross, and then you go to the first bead, and there's a different prayer for that. And then you go to these three beads, and there's another prayer for these three beads. And then there's another prayer when you get to this point. And each of these beads, there's another prayer, and you go all the way around saying all of these prayers. It takes quite a long time. And then you end up back at the cross saying all the appropriate prayers at all the appropriate time. And all of these prayers have a cadence to them. They all have, if you're saying them out loud, a breathing pattern associated with them, and you reach a meditative state. The unfortunate thing about this, of course, is you're saying all these words and you're driving them into your mentality. So, you know, it works as a meditative technique, but it's also a kind of self-programming technique. So if you want to do this, but you want to avoid the self-programming thing, you get yourself some Zen Buddhism beads, and I'll tell you how to use them later on. But both of these techniques actually do work to get you to a religious experience. Music, especially in a classical religious setting, can get you to a religious experience. And there's a couple of ways these work. There's the trained response, where if as a child you go to church and you're with the church community, you're with your parents, you're with your siblings, everybody's listening to the music, maybe singing along, depending on what church you go to. And now you've got feelings that are associated with this music. And for the rest of your life, whenever you hear this music, it's going to take you back to that experience. Another thing that happens, though, is music is, in my opinion, the language of emotion. And the right music will give you the right emotion. And as proof of this, watch a murder mystery and turn off the sound, and you're watching people walk down an alley, and without the music, there's no suspense, there's no anxiety, there's nothing like that. But you put that music on, and it does drive your emotional state. So in the right music, you're going to get direct neurological effects of that music, and it's going to drive your limbic system to produce certain emotions. So music can work. The music of prehistoric cultures is first firmly dated to about 40,000 years before the present. And that's quite a long time. That's the Upper Paleolithic, and they found bone flutes that go back that long. It might even go back further. It might go back as far as 300,000 years, but they have definite evidence that it goes back at least 40,000 years. Now, 40,000 years ago is just after our brains developed the ability to have human speech. So music came almost immediately after we had human speech, and it's had effects on us all along since then. Another thing that gives you the effect of religious experience is dance, and we already saw the whirling dervishes, but most primitive cultures actually have circle dances. They have religious music that they dance to, and they're exercising. So this is a 3-for-1, right? You're getting the exercise kick, you're getting the music kick, and you're dancing at the same time. And dances, once again, if they have prescribed moves and there's breathing that's rhythmic that's associated with those prescribed moves, again, that's going to increase the effects. So we can add those to our list. Extended exercise, praying, music, and dance all give you these religious experiences. There are also religious practices, and some of them are not too nice. There's a whole bunch of them that come from the Middle Ages that involve extreme pain. And they call this mortification of the flesh. And in the Middle Ages, they believed that the Black Plague and the downfall of civilization was caused because man was not religious enough. They weren't worthy of having a good life, so they would go through this mortification exercise of beating themselves with whips. They would wear hair shirts. They would wear a thing around their leg called a surplice that actually bit into your leg when you walked and made you bleed and everything else. So whatever floats your boat. I never got into this stuff. But pain, if it's in the right context, will give you a religious experience. What you do is you give it up to God, right? You take the suffering and you say, I'm suffering for God. Meditative practices are used to calm the mind, and they work as well. And you can attain a state of consciousness, such as what's called here Nirvikalpa Samadhi or Nirvana. And meditation can be focused on the breath, on concepts, on mantras, on symbols. All of these things work. And basically, it's a way of stopping your brain from talking. And that's the primary purpose of meditative practices. And I'll explain why that's important in a bit. This is a meditative practice called walking meditation, where you start on the outside, right? You're in the real world. You're outside of a maze. And then you walk into the maze and you follow the maze around, and you're leaving the real world as you go through this process. and you do some meditative practice. You give yourself positive affirmations, say, as you're doing your walking, and you get closer and closer to the central part of the maze. And when you get there, then you meditate for a time. And when you're done with your meditation practice, then you follow the maze back out and you leave your meditated state and you re-enter the real world. And I think this is really cool. If I had a yard big enough, I'd probably build one of these things. So we can add that to our list. Meditation will give you a transcendental experience. Another religious practice that seems to work is questioning or investigating self-representations, cognitive schemata, such as self-inquiry and Huatu practices. And Douglas Harding wrote a book about this called On Having No Head. Let me go over some of this stuff. Self-representation, there's a famous Zen koan where you ask yourself, what am I? What is I? And you think about that thing. What is I? And what it does is it breaks down your association with your ego and things like that if you do it in an appropriate manner. Or you think about your thinking, because thinking is a multi-layered thing. You can think about something and in the background have a second voice going, thinking about what you're thinking about and how you're thinking about it. And that's an interesting thing. Are there two people in your head, and so on? So if you do this kind of a practice, you can get yourself someplace interesting. And the having no head thing, though, what that's about is actually Zen Buddhism. Once again, he just approached it in a different way. But 1909, that's when Zen Buddhism started to become recognized in the Western world. What is your face before your mother and father were born, right? This is another one of those thought problems. And they don't really have answers most of the time, but they force your brain into a state where, you're faced with something that you can't explain. You can't answer it. You can't rationalize it, but you can think about it. And doing that shuts off the chatter. And reason and imagination and all mental chatter die down. You forget your name, your humanness, your thingness, all that could be called me or mine. Past and future drop away. You become lighter than air, clearer than glass, altogether releasing yourself. Who can say what this is without calling it a jug of milk? There's a Zen koan for you to contemplate for the rest of the day. So Zen Buddhism, enlightenment, shutting down the mental chatter, basically. Then you can do psychoactive substances. You can do drugs, herein called entheogens. And there are various drugs. I wouldn't recommend, if you have no experience with any of these, don't do it, because you're not ready. But if you do want to do it, you better find somebody who actually understands what it's going to do to you and how to keep you from freaking yourself out. Because you can certainly go to places you don't want to be if you take, say, psilocybin. Cannabis is legal these days. And if you want to try a religious experience based on drugs, I would recommend you go to a local store or through the mail. You can buy gummies that have THC in them. And don't take the whole gummy, cut it in half, cut it in a quarter, whatever. Try a little bit, see what happens to you. If nothing happens, don't take another piece, because when you take a gummy, it takes hours for it to come on. So, bide your time. If you get through a whole day on a quarter of a piece and it did nothing for you, then you go to a half, right? Most of these drugs I have never heard of.
Ron, what was the first one? Yeah, because that was unfamiliar to me.
Ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is also called DMT, and this is a religious practice from, I believe, South America, and it involves throwing up and all kinds of bad things.
On the slide after this, though, you had the first one, the Amanita.
Yeah, never heard of it. I didn't look it up. Feel free. Anybody who wants copies of these slides, by the way, you're welcome to them. Because then you'll have all the links that I've got attached to the slides.
Yeah,
yes, and Amanita Amanita muscaria is a mushroom.
Ah,
Ah,
magic
Magic
mushrooms.
mushrooms.
Huh?
There you go.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay. Dr. R.R. Griffiths and his colleagues at Johns Hopkins did a double-blind study evaluating the psychological effects of psilocybin compared with Ritalin. And what they found was that 36% of hallucinogen-naive adults were recruited for this. This is people with no experience with any kind of drugs. And 61% of them had a mystical experience that persisted for 2 and 14 months when they were followed up. So, you can get a religious experience from a drug and it will persist for quite a long time. So entheogens is another thing to add to the list. Now, notice this is a pretty long list now of ways you can have a religious experience, and it's prescriptive. If you want to do the transcendental experience, well, go to meditation. If you want to have that kind of experience and achieve enlightenment, then go to Zen Buddhism, or you could dance your way through it. In neurophysiology, though, now we're getting into science, right? A 2011 paper suggested that psychiatric conditions associated with psychotic spectrum symptoms may be possible explanations for revelatory-driven experience and activity, such as those of Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and St. Paul. Now, St. Paul was the guy who went on the road to Damascus. He experienced a bright light. He went blind. He fell to the ground. It took 3 days for him to recover sight, and that was considered to be a major religious experience. And it's in the New Testament and described very well, so well, in fact, that modern doctors have looked at that and realized it was a certain kind of an epileptic seizure based on the symptoms. So, having something wrong with your brain can also give you a religious experience. So we can add that to the list. Now, what do all these things have in common? Is there a scientific explanation for all of these that doesn't require us to believe in something divine or something mystical? So let's talk about neurophysiology. The neuroscience of religion takes neural correlates as the basis of all cognitive functions. So everything you experience is because of the way your brain works. All of your experiences, in fact, are experienced in your brain. You don't experience the real world, you experience your brain's interpretation of the real world. And we could talk about that all day. But that also implies that religious experiences must also be a correlate of your brain. These religious experiences are emergent properties of neural correlates. Now, if we take that as a major premise, and as an atheist, right, this is where I go, then we can follow on. This approach does not necessitate exclusion of the self, but interprets the self as influenced or otherwise acted upon by underlying neural mechanisms. So it's all about the brain and how the brain works. Proponents of this argue that religious experience can be evoked then through stimulus of specific brain regions. In other words, if we could somehow put a magnetic field or electrical current through a specific part of your brain, we could give you a religious experience. And it's just, deus ex machina, literally. The correlate to this, the obverse of this coin, is it can be observed then if you're having a religious experience using some kind of medical equipment that can visualize your brain. So let's look at an image of the brain and say, this is what your brain looks like on nothing. And this is what your brain looks like on meditation. And you can see they're very different. The differences appear mainly in the frontal cortex, and it's labeled here as the attention area. I'll talk more about that in a minute, and the temporal lobe. So these are the areas that are mainly affected by meditating over not meditating. So let's look at the temporal lobe first. look at that. This is the area over here that we're talking about. And the temporal lobe is where your primary auditory cortex is. This is where you process what you hear. And this is where you associate what you hear with experiences, information that you have, memories, and so on. And it's also your sensory speech area higher up. But when you think, if you think in words, there's a lot of brain activity here. Now you remember meditation, the purpose of meditation is to shut this up, right? So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the prefrontal area, which is also affected by meditation, this is where your executive function lives. This is where, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but suppose you hear somebody say something, right? And the auditory information that comes in doesn't come directly here. It comes through another organ inside your brain, deep inside your brain, and it gets distributed in different areas. So part of it comes to the primary or auditory cortex, where it's interpreted as sound, but some of it goes to the association area, where it's associated with memories and past experiences and things you know about. And then the output of these two parts of your brain, which are working independently and in parallel, gets sent to another place, the precuneus, and from there it gets sent to the prefrontal area. So it takes time for all of this stuff to happen. And the prefrontal area is where all of the sight that you're seeing and all of the sound that you're hearing and all of the touch that you're feeling all comes from the precuneus, where it's collected up. It all comes up here, and you get to look at it and say, wow, that's interesting. What I just did, why did I just do that? And then you make up a reason why you did it. And then you say, was that a good thing or a bad thing? Should I do this in the future, or should I avoid this? And that's consciousness happening right there. So all of these different parts of your brain feed up to the precuneus. It comes up here, and that's where you have executive function, where I say, was that a good idea or was that a bad idea? Now, both meditating Buddhists and praying Catholic nuns, meditating and praying Catholic nuns, they're probably praying the rosary, right? So they're actually doing deep meditation, just like those Buddhists are, have increased activity in the frontal lobes of the brain. These areas are linked with increased focus and attention, planning skills, the ability to project into the future, and the ability to construct complex arguments. So that's where the blood's going. So if you're praying the rosary, if you're doing that kind of deep meditation, that increases blood flow to the frontal lobe, and it increases your ability to focus and pay attention to things. Same with Zen Buddhism, doing deep meditation. Intense Islamic prayer, then, you would think is about the same, but it's not. Islamic prayer has, as its most fundamental concept, the surrendering of oneself to God. Now, when you're praying, like you're a nun praying the rosary, you're repeating words, and you're repeating them over and over and over again, and you're programming yourself. And in Islamic prayer, you're doing the same thing, but your prayer now is, I'm surrendering myself to God. I'm surrendering myself to God over and over and over again. And this activity reduces the prefrontal cortex and frontal lobe activity connected with it, as well as the activity in the parietal lobes. And I haven't talked about them yet, but I will. The prefrontal cortex is involved in executive control, as I said, and willful behavior, as well as decision-making. So the researchers hypothesized it would make sense that a practice that centers on relinquishing control would result in decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, and that's exactly what happens. So Islamic praying lowers blood flow to the frontal lobe and results in relinquished control effects. So again, we're getting a list that's prescriptive. If you want increased focus and attention, go to this, go to this. If you don't want that, then become a Muslim.
Ron, does that mean less executive?
Yeah.
Sorry, you said yes?
Yes.
So it's less controlling yourself and more
Well, you're giving control to your God.
Right. So,
right? Which means if you want to know what to do today, you're going to go to the Bible of your God
right.
and you're going to look it up. And if you look at people that are fundamentalists,
Mhm.
and everything's prescribed: what you wear, what you eat, when you pray, how often you pray. It's all prescribed. You don't have to think.
Mhm. So the
So
self gets some subverted.
sublimated.
Right. Yep. Mhm.
Okay,
Thanks.
now we're going to talk about the parietal lobe because that's been mentioned. And remember, you get in meditation different changes in the brain. And one of those places is the parietal lobe. Here it is. So let's talk about what the parietal lobe is all about. Both prayer and meditation correlate with decreased activity in the parietal lobe. So whatever it does, it's going to happen less if you're doing deep meditation and when I say prayer in this context, it's always correlated with deep meditation because they're really kind of the same thing, although one has words associated with it that are programming you, where meditation could but doesn't necessarily. So what happens in the parietal lobe is spatial sense and navigation and proprioception. Now, what's proprioception? If you close your eyes and you can touch your nose with your finger, that's kind of amazing, isn't it? The reason you can do that is because in your brain, there's a map of your body. And in that map is a nose section and is a finger section, and your brain knows where your finger is and your brain knows where your nose is. So even with your eyes closed, you can do that. That's called proprioception. Of course, if you've had too much to drink, that gets a little harder to do because it shuts down the function of the parietal lobe. It also has to do with where you are in the world. So spatial sense and navigation, where am I? Now, one of the things they found out with jet pilots when the jets started going really fast is brain function was perturbed by acceleration of the jet. And what was happening was blood was being driven out of the brain, and it was shutting down the function of the parietal lobe, and the pilots were losing spatial sense. They didn't know where their bodies were, and they would actually hallucinate themselves being outside the plane. And people undergoing surgery have this experience as well. So the main sensory receptive area for the sense of touch is also in the parietal lobe. So things like temperature and pain are experienced there. So what happens if blood is taken out of the parietal lobe through some practice? Also, the dorsal stream is affected in the visual system. And the visual system dorsal stream is associated with what am I looking at as opposed to where am I looking, okay? So it's identifying things. So Catholic praying is deep meditation, lowers blood flow in the parietal lobe, lowers proprioception, lowers your sensitivity to pain. Islamic praying, same thing. Meditation, same thing. So if you're looking for, and again, we can be prescriptive, right? If you're looking for increased focus and attention and less sensitivity to pain, and also the ability to transcend the physical, right? Get rid of some proprioception, well, you can do one of these things. A recent study that Medical News Today reported on found that religion activates also some other areas of the brain where reward processing takes place. And reward processing takes place normally when you're having sex, doing other addictive activities, I'll talk about that in a second, or doing drugs, because the receptors for dopamine line up with the receptors for certain drugs. They're about, the drug sends out a chemical that fits into the receptor for dopamine, and it gives you the same feelings that you would get when doing some of these other activities. And it's not just dopamine, there are a bunch of other drugs that your body produces that can have these effects. Researchers led by Jeff Anderson examined the brains of 19 young Mormons using a functional MRI scanner. Now, let's see what Mormons have in common with everybody else. When asked whether and to what degree the participants were feeling the Spirit, those who reported the most intense spiritual feelings displayed increased activity in these three areas, and I'm not going to try and pronounce them, but what they are is they're the parts of the brain that light up when you're having sex, you're listening to music, you're gambling, or when you're taking drugs. How about that? The participants also reported feelings of peace and physical warmth. So engaging in spiritual practices raises levels of serotonin. That's one of the drugs your body produces, which is the happiness neurotransmitter, and endorphins, which also make you feel good, and dopamine, which also makes you feel good. So sex, spiritual feelings, music, gambling, drugs, all activate the same reward processing parts of the brain. And all of these things can become addictive. There are people that are addicted to sex. There are people that are addicted to music, although that's pretty uncommon. Gambling, however, is amazingly addictive, and I'll tell you why. It's because psychologists, having studied all of the things that trigger reward processing in the brain, have sold this information to the people that build slot machines. And slot machines, and now social media, are all specifically designed to trigger those parts of the brain on a repeated basis. So you want to keep going back, and every time you go back, it gets strengthened. So gambling, just like social media, extremely addictive. And that makes you wonder, well, maybe the search for these feelings can be addictive if they're spiritual feelings. So maybe, being a particular religion, if it gives you those feelings, if it gives you peace and physical warmth and dopamine and serotonin, maybe it's addictive too. And Karl Marx noted that religion is the opium of the people. So not an original idea with me. So our religious experiences, now that we know they're real, they can be generated at will, pretty much. Are they a good thing or a bad thing? A study published in 2011 showed that greater atrophy in the hippocampus, I'm going to talk about the downside first, atrophy in the hippocampus in individuals who identify with specific religious groups, as well as those with no religious affiliation, can occur. Atrophy of the hippocampus, that's another part of your brain. In this study, Owen et al. Used MRI to measure the volume of the hippocampus, a central structure of the limbic system that's involved in emotion, as well as in memory formation. So certain religions can affect you emotionally, your ability to sense emotions, to feel emotions, to generate emotions, as well as generating new memories. They evaluated the MRIs of 268 men and women aged 58 and over, so older people. Now, why older people? Because those are the people who have already had their hippocampuses either affected or not. The study focuses specifically on religious individuals compared to non-religious individuals. The study also broke down these individuals into those who are born agains or have had life-changing religious experiences. They've seen the light. And the results showed significantly greater hippocampal atrophy in individuals reporting life-changing religious experience. So born again people have greater or will attain greater hippocampal atrophy as they age. They found significantly greater hippocampal atrophy among born again Protestants, Catholics, and this scared the hell out of me, those with no religious affiliation, compared with Protestants not identifying as born again. So, religious individuals who are born again, greater hippocampal atrophy with all of its bad side effects. Not born again, no or very little hippocampal atrophy. So, Born again, not a good idea. No affiliation, greater hippocampal atrophy. Uh-oh. So we got to figure out what this is about, right? Well, what they surmised after all of their studies was it's all about stress. Now I'm not stressed. I feel better. They argue that some individuals in the religious minority or those who struggle with their beliefs, born again people, experience higher levels of stress. Am I good enough? Am I doing all the right things? Am I meeting the expectations of the Lord? Am I stressing myself out? Yeah. And I'm generating stress hormones, cortisol, in quantities that actually depress the volume of the hippocampus over time. So if you're going to be an atheist, don't be a stressed out atheist.
Ron,
This might, yes.
question again. I wonder if that correlates more to people who become non-believers later in life, where they have to struggle with the decision to leave versus
Well,
don't.
maybe these people that were studied were over 58. So
Yeah.
that could certainly be a piece of it. Yeah.
Because I stopped believing when I was a kid, and I wonder what my hippocampus looks like. So.
Yeah, right. Well, so it's about stress, right? So if you have no affiliation, if you're a humanist rather, get away from the stressful things. Because if you have more stress, if you're worried about things, and how does this work out? I think the problem here with atheists is, atheists can't run for political office. Atheists can't tell people that they're atheists at work, because if they do, they're going to suffer for it, or at least they are afraid they're going to suffer for it. I certainly did. Um, and and there's other things. There's the whole lack of community that atheists have because they don't go to church on a regular basis. They don't have that support group. They don't have that common sense of community that's relieving stress, and that's potentially a large part of it. And we'll see that again. In 2015, Duke University professor of psychiatry Harold Koenig and his research team carefully reviewed more than 3,000 studies published prior to 2015, 3,000 studies that related to all of this. And a total of 79% of relevant studies showed a link between religion, spirituality, and psychological well-being. So this is the upside. A majority also demonstrated a relationship with physical well-being. And another finding is that religion and spirituality are related to longer life. This is good stuff. In one study, researchers followed 8,450 people between the ages of 40 and 90 and more for more than 8 years, noting those who passed away from any cause. The results revealed that there's an 18% reduction in the risk of dying during this period for people who went to church once a week, and a 30% for people that went more than once a week. And that's as good as going to the gym more than once a week. So if you don't like going to the gym, you could just go to church 3 times a week instead and get the same longevity benefits at least. So here we go with our prescriptives. You want psychological well-being, you want physical well-being, and you want long life. Go with religion, spirituality, and church attendance, and you can get that stuff. Now, where does that all come from? Well, as a Catholic, as a lapsed Catholic, as they say, what kind of atheist are you? Are you a Protestant Catholic or what is it? A Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist? What I was taught is that my body was a temple of the Holy Ghost, right? So what goes along with that? Well, you don't get smoked, you don't get tattooed, you don't do anything that would hurt your body, like you don't get your nose pierced. There's a lot of things associated with being a Catholic. There was even a prescription about diet in there that depending on what your beliefs are, may or may not be good, but having fish at least once a week, that's absolutely good for you. So better health habits. And the more orthodox you are in this stuff, the better your health habits are going to be, potentially. Also, you have enhanced coping in that as a Catholic, I could go to a priest and I could confess my sins. So take all the stress off by handing them off to the priest. And he would tell me, go pray the rosary. He basically telling me to go meditate, right? And then you got all the social support from, having a whole community of Catholic people around you who all believe the same things as you do. Now, when you look into the blue zone studies that have been done, better health habits, enhanced coping mechanisms, and social support are common to the blue zones in the world. And the blue zones in the world are places where people live to be 100 years old and still astute. So, should we actively pursue religious experiences? Well, it seems like the answer to that is yes, but be selective about it. And there are different ways to do it. And of course, you could do it with religion, right? That's what we've been talking about. But there may be some artificial ways to do it. There may be some structured practices you could do. We've talked about that a bit. And you could do drugs, and we've talked about that. So there's the religion thing. We can add that to the list. Artificially, there are some things you can do. Do the neurobiological underpinnings of religious experience mean that it can be artificially recreated? Well, probably yes, right? Because if it's all coming from your brain, then stimulating a certain part of your brain artificially would give you that religious experience coming in from outside. If a divine experience proves to be biologically predetermined, does having the right scientific information enable us to create the illusion of God? The answer is yes, it's been done. In the 1990s, Dr. Michael Persinger, the director of neuroscience at Laurentian University, designed what came to be known as the God helmet. And this is a device that you can go online and buy today. It's expensive. I wanted to buy one, so when I did my talk at Red Bank Humanist, I could pass it around and give everybody a nice religious experience, but it was $650, and I'm not that nice a guy. But this is a device that's able to simulate religious experiences by stimulating an individual's tempoparietal lobes using magnetic fields. There's a picture of the first one that was made. This was the experimental device. And I don't know why it cost $650. It doesn't look like that to me. But of course, the modern one doesn't look like this. It's an actual helmet. And it reminded me when I saw this of Woody Allen. So this is something, if it becomes cheap enough, and maybe I'll go into the business of making them, right? Because it would sure be nice to have. In Dr. Persinger's experiments, about 20 religious people, which amounts to 1% of the participants, reported feeling the presence of God or seeing him in the room when wearing this device. Now, only 1% saw God. But think about this. You put a helmet on, a guy throws a switch, and you see God. You're probably a religious person and not too bright. Because any fool would see, well, it's a machine. 80% of the participants felt a presence of some sort, which they were reluctant to call God, but they felt good. So you can buy a God helmet and you can either feel a godlike presence or see a godlike presence. So there's a way to do it. Structured practices, we talked about that. There's prayer, there's meditation, there's fasting, there's exercise, there's dancing, there's intoxicating drugs. I didn't really talk about fasting, but fasting changes your blood chemistry. And if you fast long enough, it's going to take you to a different place. Humans have historically sought out ways to evoke religious experiences, from meditation and prayer to substances that can induce psychedelic experiences, which are perceived, and that's the key word, as just as spiritual and real as more natural experiences. Religious experiences are real, in conclusion, in that they are constructs of the brain. So change your brain, change your experiences, And if you change your brain the right way, you're going to get the religious experience. And there's various ways to do it. If they're associated with stress, they can be bad for your brain function. But if they're not associated with stress and associated instead with socialization, they can increase your longevity. So they can be good or bad, good, bad, good, bad. Now this experience here, we saw that. That's the religious ecstasy experience. So you can go that route. This guy's having a religious experience, but he's having a temporal lobe epilepsy stroke. And that's what he's experiencing. But that's the same thing St. Paul experienced on the road to Damascus. And they wrote about him in the Bible. These people are having a religious experience. They're listening to religious music. So you can learn to listen to music. You can learn an instrument. Now, playing some instruments is really good. Playing the flute, for example, requires, and I mean classically, not jazz, right? You're going to play the flute. You're going to play classical music. You're going to play Mozart. You're going to play Bach. And what happens is your eyes are following the dots. You can't think in words while you're doing this, because if you do, if you start thinking about what you're doing, which fingers you're putting down and so on, the music stops. So you shut off the part of your brain that's talking all the time, the monkey brain. So that's a good thing. Also, you're doing controlled breathing. And controlled breathing is meditative. And listening to the music is a good thing. And if you play in a group, now you're getting the group support part of it too. So playing an instrument is terrific, especially if it's a wind instrument. But they're all good. Running marathons, that's great. Taking a walk in the woods is a good thing. Playing golf, not if you're a bad golfer because of the stress part. Dancing is a good thing, especially dancing with other people. But even if you're dancing with just one other person, it's a social thing. And now you're touching somebody, if depending on how you dance. But even dancing alone is going to be good for you because it's exercise. That always helps. You can meditate. If you don't want to do the rosary, you can buy some Buddhist mala beads and count yourself through them. You can practice Zen. You can take drugs that are not too frightening or bad for you. There was a recent study done on marijuana, by the way, that says repetitive marijuana use increases your empathy. And that's a good thing, right? It increases your ability to relate to other people. Having sex, that's good for you. And of course, you can always join a religion. Meditation. There are so many ways to meditate. People sell courses on meditation. You don't have to take a course. You can meditate simply by counting your breaths. There's a thing called square breathing. You breathe into the count of 4. You breathe in through your nose. You hold your breath for a count of 4. You breathe out through your mouth for a count of 4. And you hold your empty lungs for a count of 4. And then you do it again. And it's amazing how calming that is. You can chant a mantra. You can say Om Mani Padme Hum. And since you don't know what it means, it's not going to hurt you. It's just nonsense words, and you just say them for every bead as you breathe. You breathe in, and then you breathe out, and you go Om Mani Padme Hum. Or you can sing a line from a song, as long as what you're singing isn't programming you in a bad direction. Or you can scan your body. You can take a bead and think about your toes. Then you go to the next bead and think about your ankles and relax your ankles. And then you can take the next bead and relax your calves and go through your whole body up and down. You can think about people. Every bead can be a person you've known. And don't think too much about them, just say their name. Or you can do an affirmation. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. So you can do all these things. Or if you don't want to do any of them in a religious context, you can just go with the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You can find a church or religion substitute. You can join a service organization. You can be a religious political person. A lot of Republicans these days treat it as a religion, not so much with Democrats. Democrats don't even treat it as a sport. A lot of Republicans do that. Or you can actually do sports. Sports is a good thing. If you join a team or you're a spectator at a team, you can treat spectating as a religion. I mean, how many football fanatics are out there that paint their faces? Talk about religious practices. Or you can find something that's kind of like a church, but isn't a church. It's a community without dogma. And they can talk about ethics without going into the woo-woo stuff. And they can answer your questions with science instead of making shit up, right? But in the final analysis, you want to be excellent to each other and just party on. So there you go. So I hope that was fun.
It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun. Thanks, Ron.
Okay.